This week began the final act of the multi-year Synod process, a meeting of bishops and the Pope that began back in 2015. An initiative of Pope Francis, the Synods were billed as a kind of Vatican III and hailed by progressives as a chance to redefine church practice and teaching. But it really hasn't accomplished much or anything. The Synod on the Family was supposed to change church teaching on divorce and remarried Catholics, but there was fierce resistance by cardinals, bishops, the laity. The battle was so ugly, the Pope had to settle for a footnote in a document cooked up by a committee. Learning their lesson, organizers tried to limit the guest list at the 2019 Amazonian Synod and keep out the naysayers. But due to the appearance of the Pope praying before a Pachamama idol and a timely book release by Cardinal Sarah and Benedict XVI, the effort to toss out clerical celibacy was averted. Along the way, there were papal edicts limiting the Latin Mass and authorizing the blessing of gay couples, none of which was discussed or voted on in these synods. Now we have the last synod, allegedly, populated by largely progressives and stage-managed within an inch of its life. They want no floor fights, and the agenda is murky, given that most of the hot-button issues have now been sent to study committees handpicked by the Pope, which begs the question, why go through this theatrical parliamentary exercise at all, especially when the Pope will do as he pleases anyhow? And how can you listen to the whole church when only one voice of the church is allowed access to the Synodal Hall? With that, let's go to Synod Central, where we bring you the latest from this month-long synod on synodality in Rome. Joining me, the Papal Posse, editor-in-chief of thecatholicthing.org, Robert Royal from Rome, and canon lawyer and priest of the Archdiocese of New York, Father Gerald Murray, joining me from Manhattan. Gentlemen, here we go again. Before the synod officially began on Wednesday, Pope Francis presided at what was called a penitential celebration. In this liturgy, Pope Francis had 7 cardinals read requests for forgiveness for 7 sins identified by the Secretary General of this synod, and apparently these requests were written by the Pope himself. Cardinal Christoph Schönborn of Austria asked forgiveness in the name of all the baptized for sins against synodality and listening.
I ask forgiveness, feeling shame for the obstacles that we place in the building of a truly synodal symphonic church, aware of being holy people of God who walk together, recognizing the common baptismal dignity. I ask forgiveness, feeling shame for all the times that we have not heard the Holy Spirit, preferring to listen to ourselves, defending opinions and ideologies that hurt the communion in Christ of all, expected at the end of time from the Father. I ask forgiveness, feeling shame for when we have transformed authority into power, suffocating plurality.
Father, is there really a sin against synodality? And what do you make of this opening ceremony?
Well, I've never heard of a sin against synodality, and really synodality now is a completely vague term. We don't know what it means. Originally, synod meant a meeting of bishops. In the Catholic Church, that was its ecclesiastical definition. Now it's become a meeting of everybody, all lay people, priests, deacons, bishops, cardinals, the Pope. It is like you mentioned the word parliament. It's this expression of kind of aping what is done in the secular world, and it bears, really kind of a resemblance more to a popular assembly, which is not elected but appointed by a strong man. We had the Popular Assembly in Venezuela. What is going on here? A meeting of bishops to tell the Pope, advise the Pope, has become now a potpourri of everybody with grievances and agendas. And the idea that you sin against synodality by disagreeing, isn't synodality meant that we listen to each other, including when we disagree?
Yeah, Bob, what does it mean to have a sin against plurality? One could argue, I won't, but one might, that when the Pope issued that, a blessing on gay couples, that was a sin against plurality. There was no plurality in the church that wanted that.
Yeah, it's ironic that Cardinal Schönborn, who is the primary author of the Catechism of the Catholic Church, an invaluable document stating what we believe and what we believe ought to be our morals, apologized for turning authority into power. I think that without authority, without proper authority from God, what is the church other than a debating society? When we receive a revelation from God, someone has to interpret that, and that has to be an authority. Now, what we've seen, and you rightly say, is that that authority has been turned into power and has created an obstacle for some people, like the traditional Latin Mass. People were not harming anyone. They're no longer basically allowed to celebrate the Latin Mass. There are people who've been insulted as being rigid and being backwardist. And yet, at the same time, we're told that this is supposed to be a conversation that gets us beyond our own views of the world and gets us into a listening dialogue with one another. So it's clearly a contradiction in terms, and the real oddity about it all is, I think, anyway, that synodality is not a what. It's a process. And we've been told by some of the synod organizers that the synod is what it does, which means it can do just about anything.
Okay, reading one of the prepared petitions for forgiveness was the head of the Vatican's doctrinal office, Cardinal Victor Manuel Fernandez, and he was begging pardon for the supposed misuse of doctrine, expressing the following.
Shame for all the times that in the Church, especially us pastors who are entrusted with the task of confirming our brothers and sisters in the faith, have not been able to guard and propose the gospel as a living source of eternal newness, indoctrinating it and risking reducing it to a pile of dead stones to be thrown at others.
Bob, the sin of using doctrine as stones to be hurled, your reaction quickly.
Look, I think it's exactly the opposite. If you want to look at a sin that certain members of the clergy have committed, it's not defending doctrine. I mean, how many people are throwing doctrinal stones at other people? It's a small group. It's like the Pharisees. The number of people who ignore Catholic doctrine and think that they can change is immensely larger. So, look, I understand what they think that they were trying to do with it, but it seems to me that the exact opposite is the reality.
Yeah, Father, it sounds like restating and defending established church doctrine is now a sin. So what's the purpose of doctrine at all then?
No, this is, I'll say it quite quick. This is a ridiculous and contemptible idea that telling someone the truth of Christ as taught by his church is somehow an attack, if not an attempt to kill that person. Because remember, stoning is a means of killing people. So throwing stones by telling them the truth, defending the Trinity, the Incarnation, the real presence, I think this goes back to the moral order. When you tell people not to commit sin that they like to commit, they feel offended. They're not offended. They're being liberated from their error by being told that their behavior doesn't conform to God's law. So this really is horrible for the head of the doctrinal office to say teaching doctrine is an offense against people. It's not.
Father, you know, there were a string of cardinals. I can't go through them all. We just don't have time. But Cardinal Kevin Farrell of the Dicastery for Laity, Family, and Life read Pope Francis's prayer for forgiveness on behalf of all the men in the Church for the times that the dignity of women has not been recognized or defended. He said, on behalf of all members of the Church, especially us men, we're acknowledging the certain contempt for the dignity of women and making them, quote, silent and submissive. Father, what do you make of these newly coined sins? And who in the Church made women silent and submissive? And why didn't anyone tell Mother Angelica or Nancy Pelosi?
This is a ridiculous caving in to feminist categories, which basically say since men are in charge, women are oppressed. This is absolute nonsense. The highest saint in the Church is the Blessed Virgin Mary. The female saints throughout history are among the most inspiring leaders that we have on the path to heaven. I work as a parish priest. I don't know, 75, 80% of the people I cooperate with on a daily basis are women. What this is getting at is to say to the feminists who want to have female ordination, I'm sorry we offended you, please forgive us. This is ridiculous. You want to defend women? How about we teach the truth about marriage? How about we teach the truth about abortion? And I praise Pope Francis because he's been teaching that truth recently with great vigor on the airplane. Mm-hmm. But telling women that they're oppressed by a male church, this is nonsense. This is not the truth.
Bob, what do you make of this entire penitential service? Again, it sounds like it could have come from a UN website or something.
Yeah, I mean, as we can see quite clearly, it apologizes for a lot of sins that are kind of a progressive nature, a kind of a liberalizing nature in the church that fit quite well with what goes on in the developed world, in Europe and in the United States and other developed countries. Meanwhile, around the world, when things like the blessing of gay couples is proposed by the Vatican, we get an enormous pushback in Africa, in Asia, in Eastern Europe, among the Christian Orthodox, and from many others as well. So there are many other voices out there, and why those particular sins were selected as opposed to others, you can only put it down to a kind of a politicizing element in this penitence right before you begin a big event like the Synod.
Jens, at the start of this Synod on October 2nd, Pope Francis defended the changes to the Synod that now allow participation of non-bishops as full members. He said the following: "The bishop, the principal and visible foundation of unity of each particular church, cannot carry out his ministry except within the people of God and with the people of God, preceding, standing in the midst of, and following that portion of God's people entrusted to his care." Father, your thoughts on this, and why call it a synod of bishops if this is the, quote, new way, with the people leading the shepherd?
Well, this has been a problem since the Pope decided that we were going to have lay people and priests and deacons and women and men religious as equal voting members of a synod. The Synod of Bishops was started after Vatican II by Pope Paul VI, precisely so that representative bishops from throughout the world could advise the Pope, because the bishops, according to Vatican II, share a common concern for the entire church. Now this has become basically what Bob used the word debating society. Everyone's in on the act. Everybody gets to talk, but by the way, they're selected people. Why is a bishop important in the diocese? Because he is a successor of the apostles who is responsible for that flock. So therefore to say, well, the bishop is equal to the layperson at a synod is to undermine the order of the church. The bishops are ordained ministers of Christ, and they're hierarchs, meaning they have authority to guide the sheep. That is being neglected. In fact, it's really been eviscerated at this synod because, you know, a college student has an equal vote to a cardinal in charge of a Roman curia, of a Roman dicastery. This is not how the church works.
Yeah. Well, my concern is, and you heard it in that definition, the bishop is a symbol of unity. He's not a symbol of unity. He's the shepherd of souls. And you know, Bob, your reaction to this quickly before we talk about, well, I'll get your reaction to this as well. Cardinal Mueller, Gerhard Mueller, weighed in on the canonical issues with this synod. Given the preponderance of non-bishop participants and voting members, he said it is not a homogeneous assembly, and therefore the canonical status of the assembly is not clear. It cannot be that all are giving counsel and speaking together, and the Pope remains as the only authority who decides according to his own parameters and not according to the revelation, the revealed truth. This is the wrong perspective. Bob, your take first, and then Father.
Yeah, I'd like to hear the canon lawyers speak about this one, but just as a layman, let me say this. This business reminds me of a joke. It actually happened, though, that someone asked Cardinal Newman once, does the church need lay people? And he said she would look awfully foolish without them. Now, if you took this just at a superficial level, of course it's true that bishops need to be working alongside lay people. That's what he's there for. A shepherd must have sheep. But I don't think that that's what was intended here. And what I fear is that under this sort of high-sounding way of democratizing what the shepherd and the sheep are really about, it's really about increasing the power of lay people in the church in ways that are unspecified. And I think Cardinal Mueller is exactly right, therefore puts into question what is the status of a bishop. A bishop is either the shepherd who watches over the sheep, or he's just a larger sheep or a central sheep walking along with the rest of the flock.
Father, you're the canonist of the group here. Cardinal Mueller questions the canonical status of this entire synod, given how differently it's being conducted from synods previous. Your thoughts?
Yes, well, Cardinal Muller is right if you talk about theology and canon law reflecting theology. The reason why the Synod of Bishops was started after Vatican II was to give the shepherds of the church throughout the world a role in advising the Pope, who is the universal shepherd, but he depends on good advice and guidance. And that is given in their role as shepherds with and under the Pope. So the idea that the leadership of the church is now going to include in some strange way in these solemn deliberations people who aren't shepherds, who aren't bishops, it undermines the unique nature of the episcopate in the church. This is really, it's a serious problem. Cardinal Burke spoke about this a year ago. This is a very serious problem. We are not like the Anglican Church, where the leadership can decide, well, lay people and priests and bishops, everybody has an equal role at a synod. No, this is really a violation of what Vatican II intended with the Synod of Bishops.
Bob, as we've been reporting for months, LGBT issues, the ordination of women, those have all been slated for discussion in private study groups set to meet all the way through June of 2025. Cardinal Victor Manuel Fernandez did offer this update on the women's ordination issue. Based on the analysis conducted so far, he says, which also takes into account the work done by the two commissions established by Pope Francis on the female diaconate, the dicastery judges that there is still no room for a positive decision by the magisterium regarding the access of women to the diaconate, understood as a degree of the sacrament of holy orders. The Holy Father himself recently confirmed this consideration publicly. In any event, the dicastery judges that the opportunity to continue the work of in-depth study remains open. Bob, so this comes from the secret study group on this issue. Fernandez acknowledges that the Pope's position, the fact that he shut down the possibility of a female diaconate with holy orders, as he told Norah O'Donnell back in May on 60 Minutes, yet the DDF judges that the study may continue. Why? What are they studying?
Well, it seems clear to me, although I may be overly optimistic, that Francis has decided that there will be no female deacons in the Catholic Church. Now, he said that often. I think that he keeps open the so-called study because it prolongs the moment of having to make a decision. But I think pretty much his mind is made up about this. What I'm worried about is that there will be a kind of an incremental approach from a different angle, and that is there will be some sort of para-ministry that will, in effect, mirror being a deacon, but it won't be called being a deacon. It'll be some sort of female order of some kind that will, sort of through salami tactics get us closer and closer to allegedly being able to ordain women. I don't think that this Pope will go in that direction. He's headed in that direction, and he's left that conversation open. But it's very odd. You say that word "still." It still seems impossible to pronounce in a affirmative way about deaconesses. It means that they're going to continue to discuss as long as they can and not make a decision.
Yeah, Father, I mean, will the DDF, the doctrinal office of the Vatican, eventually overrule the Pope? Are we seeing the development in real time of some kind of non-ordained diaconate for women?
Well, that's the worrying thing here, Raymond. When he says, Cardinal Fernandez says, the diaconate understood as part of holy orders. No, wait a minute. The diaconate is part of holy orders. This isn't somebody's understanding. You and I can understand a historical event differently. We can't understand a sacrament differently because it has one nature. So it's very worrying. I think Bob's right on target here. I think they want to try and probably resurrect deaconesses, which are definitely was an institution in the early church, but had nothing to do with being ordained as male deacons were ordained. So no, it's very worrying. And this whole tentative notion that the DDF, prolongs a study because we can't yet arrive at a decision in favor of what people are asking for. The Catholic Church does not exist as an opinion-gathering organization that finally says, okay, enough talk, now the decision. No, revelation is given to the Church. We know this. There have never been female deacons in the Church for a reason, because Jesus didn't intend that and the apostles understood that.
Yeah, I want to turn away from the Synod for one moment before we return to it at the end. I have to ask you about a recent report that the Vatican is targeting traditional Latin Mass communities, and that now includes an apostolic visitation of the Priestly Society of St. Peter. This is an order of priests that celebrate the traditional Latin Mass in full communion with Rome. In a September 30th statement from the Vatican, the Dicastery for Institutes of Consecrated Life says the following. They've called for an apostolic visitation to the priestly fraternity of St. Peter in order to deepen the understanding of this society of apostolic life, of pontifical right, and to offer the most appropriate support for its journey of following Christ, end quote. Father, I'll let you take a swat at this first. Your thoughts on why this visitation is being called now? The statement sounds benign, but is it?
Well, originally, the fraternity was under the Ecclesia Dei Commission, which was part of the Doctrine of the Faith. It was transferred to the Congregation for Religious, so the Congregation for Religious is saying that we need our own information on how it's going. That's the public aspect that's being presented. But I'm worried because apostolic visitations have been used with other religious congregations and orders as a means of disciplining them, of changing things, of, going after them. The Fraternity of St. Peter has many vocations. There's many requests all over the world for them to begin their apostolate. They're doing a great job, wonderful priests. Taken in line with Traditionis Custodes, what we have here is a continual surveillance mode on those people who like the Latin Mass. Where's the surveillance mode on religious orders which promote heresy and immorality? I haven't seen that.
Yeah. Bob, the Fraternity of St. Peter just had an apostolic visitation in 2014. And as we've reported many times, there are a plethora of different Eastern rites with different styles of liturgy within the Latin Church. There's the Ordinariate. There's the newly authorized 3-year study of a new Amazonian rite liturgy in South America. So what is the problem here?
Yeah, and one of the sins that was confessed at that penitential rite is the sort of stifling of diversity for a kind of a unity. Look, you can't help but be nervous in seeing this happen. It kind of reminds you of that old joke of Ronald Reagan's that the most terrifying phrase in the English language is, "I'm from the U.S. government and I'm here to help." Well, you don't investigate a group like this after all the measures that have been taken against the Latin Mass, without there being the expectation that maybe there's something more than just a authentic desire to help people be more authentic in their vocation to the Latin Mass. Now, I'm very worried about this too, and it seems to me to go right again against the principle of synodality, that we are a church that is able to have Eastern Rite and Melkite Rite churches. I don't see what the problem is with the Latin Rite with the FSSP.
Back in 2016, the Lepanto Institute conducted a study of political contributions from employees of church-run organizations, Catholic Relief Services principally, finding that 98% of those employees donated to pro-abortion candidates and causes. They've done a new analysis now, expanding this research to include other Catholic charitable organizations, including Catholic Charities, St. Vincent de Paul, and the Knights of Columbus, with new data showing overwhelming support, except for the Knights of Columbus, for pro-abortion, pro-LGBT candidates and causes coming from those ostensibly Catholic organizations. Father, your thoughts on these findings? Perhaps not surprising, but what does it tell us about catechesis in the last half of this century?
Well, it tells me that these organizations, sadly, employ a lot of people who do not share the Catholic perspective on morality. And that is sad. How can you be promoting and working as a church organization to promote the truth of Christ, that Christ loves the poor, the sick, and not include the unborn? Or how can you work for an organization which promotes the proposition that moral living is the only path to happiness, and yet they're voting for candidates who want to enshrine in law immoral behavior? It's very disappointing, and it's sad because except, as you say, the Knights of Columbus. Apparently, these organizations don't require that their employees share the mission statement of those organizations beyond the sense of simply helping the poor, but to do it from the perspective of Christian charity.
Bob, they say follow the money. How might this explain the synodal agenda and the preoccupation with just these causes that some of these folks are supporting politically?
Yeah, I think a lot of them, like other political leaders who claim to be Catholic, have talked themselves into the position that, well, okay, there's nothing we can do about abortion. There are large majorities in the United States that are in favor of abortion in some form or other, and therefore we're going to vote to support the people who help the poor. Well, this reminds me of the story by the American Catholic author Flannery O'Connor called "You Can't Be Any Poorer Than Dead." That if you are not going to protect human life at its earliest moment, from the moment of conception, what kind of view are you going to really have about poverty? I mean, a lot of these programs, as we well know, are getting large support from government appropriations. It's not to say that they're necessarily a puppet of the government, that there are cases in which the Catholic charities do need some support from the government to provide services. But you have to think that the kind of people who go into this kind of work and see that their revenue stream depends largely on Democrat appropriations, that has to affect them somewhat.
Okay. Father, we are only at the beginning of the second, let me do this again. Father, we are only at the beginning of the second session of the Synod on Synodality. Say that fast 5 times, ladies and gentlemen. What do you both see happening in the weeks ahead? I'll start with you, Father, and then go to Bob, who's in Rome.
Yeah, I think we've already seen the seeds of dissatisfaction with these change in the Synod, where these expert study groups are now reporting to the Synod, and they're the real power center in what's going to happen. Cardinal Grech issued a letter stating that anybody is welcome to submit contributions to the different committees, these study groups, so that they can make their voice heard. I think the Synod people are realizing that instead of doing the talking, they're being talked to.
Bob, before we go, what are you seeing in Rome? And it seems there's a lot of mixed messaging. You got Cardinal Fernandez saying ordination's off the table, yet the Pope is meeting with these female ordination activists. There's a lot of confusion out here outside of Rome.
Yeah, I take it that one of the central things that's already happened this week is are a couple lines that the Pope had in his homily at the opening Mass the other day. And he kind of said, to kind of paraphrase what he said, look, you shouldn't arrive at this Synod with the idea that certain things are to be preserved at all costs. Well, in Catholicism, we know that certain things are to be preserved at all costs. People have been martyred standing up for the faith in all times and in all places. So look, if we want to give him the benefit of the doubt, okay, what he means is don't come with your mind closed. But I think that the one really good thing that he said, and I think he's anticipating what's going to be happening over the next few weeks, is that you should also find a way to not impose is actually the word he used, not impose an agenda while you're here at the Synod. Now, I agree with this entirely. But who's likely to impose an agenda? Is it Father James Martin or is it Cardinal Mueller? I mean, we know which people are really trying to impose something on the group as a whole. I'm assuming that, don't be bullheaded is the conservatives he's criticizing, and don't try to impose an agenda is the liberals. But I think that it's very clear that the conservatives generally, or the traditionalists generally, are open to listening about things that can be discussed without departing from the faith.
Gentlemen, we will leave it there. It's going to be a long month. For commentary by Robert Royal and Father Gerald Murray, you can go to thecatholicthing.org. Thank you, gentlemen.